Welcome to Reinventing Broadcast, where AI meets content. Here we have a bonus episode for you. Let's dive in.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going way back to your very first contractor gig.
Oh, wow.
2014.
Yeah.
And this one, like so many of yours, takes us to the Far East. This time it's Hong Kong.
Right.
And we're zeroing in on March of that year. You called this the Hong Kong project.
I did, yeah. Looking forward to digging into this one.
Yeah, we're going to unpack it all. We want to see how you manage, it's your first time out as a contractor.
Right.
You've got a team, you've got testing plans, you've got stakeholders all over the place.
Yeah.
And ultimately you have to produce a report.
Yep.
And as always, we're going to go right to the source, your notes, your records, your documentation of all this. So
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, Let's dive in. So early March 2014, Hong Kong. What were your initial priorities as you landed there?
Well, I hit the ground running. And first things first, I had to figure out what I was dealing with, right?
Yeah.
Familiarize myself with the environment.
And looking at your notes, it looks like around March 10th, things really started to ramp up.
They did, yeah. It all started coming together.
You had Kenneth and Brian. They were busy getting all the hardware installed. That's always step one, right?
Absolutely. Got to have the infrastructure in place before you can do anything.
Meanwhile, you had Peter working on content transfer and setting up the initial project schedule.
Yeah, got to have a plan. Peter was great at that.
And it seems like you were pretty focused on something called the Skylight interface.
Right. That was the main software we were working with. I spent a lot of time getting to know its ins and outs.
But you ran into some access issues right off the bat.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
Permissions and all that.
Yeah.
It's like, you can have the keys to the kingdom, but if you can't open the door...
You're stuck.
Exactly. I needed those admin rights to really understand what the system could do.
And it's interesting, right from the beginning, you set up this issue log. You made it a point to document every problem as it popped up.
That was crucial, yeah. You got to stay organized, especially with a new system and a team working across different locations.
And speaking of teams, it's impressive how collaborative you were from day one.
Well, we had folks in Hong Kong and back in the UK.
Yeah.
We had to be on the same page.
You're sending emails, scheduling conference calls, trying to bridge that distance.
Yeah, got to keep those communication lines open.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it?
Oh, of course not. There are always bumps in the road when you're dealing with tech.
You had some trouble with media processing, getting Brian's laptop connected?
Right, those were some initial hiccups. Just part of getting everything up and running.
And then there was that firewall issue blocking NTP access.
Ah, yes. Network time protocol, the bane of my existence sometimes. You need those clocks synchronized, or things can get messy.
So a lot of early troubleshooting.
Oh, yeah, a fair bit of that. But that's just the nature of the beast, isn't it? You figure things out as you go along.
And you were also starting to explore the media storage itself.
Right, I had to get a handle on where everything was located on the NAS.
That's network-attached storage, a central hub for all the file.
Yeah, like the library of the system. Got to know where the books are, right?
Right. So that gives us a good picture of the setup phase, those first few days in March. But then, moving into mid-March, your notes show a big focus on testing.
Right, yeah. Once you have everything in place, you got to make sure it works as it should.
What was driving that shift in focus?
Well, the whole point of this project was to deliver content to viewers. We had to make sure that everything from the hardware to the software to the actual content itself was all working in harmony.
So you started with teletext profiles, making sure they were configured correctly.
Yeah, teletext was still a big deal back then, especially in certain parts of the world.
And it looks like you were using a waveform monitor to validate everything.
Right, had to make sure those signals were clean.
Yeah.
And Kenneth was a huge help with that. He really knew his way around the Kaleido MV.
And then, bam, you hit a snag. A standards mismatch.
Well, that was a fun one. We were dealing with both NTSC and PAL HD, and they weren't playing nicely together.
It resulted in a black output. Not good.
No, not ideal. But we figured it out. Turns out it was a simple setting, thankfully.
So you recalibrated everything and problem solved.
Yeah, sometimes it's the little things that trip you up. But it's a good reminder to always be mindful of those regional standards.
Around March 21st, you had a meeting with Stephen to review the report.
Ah, Stephen. We worked closely together on this project. He was great at keeping everyone informed and on track.
And you decided to separate the really critical issues, the deal breakers, into a separate appendix. Why was that?
I wanted to make sure that the main report was clear and concise, focusing on the operational and localization test results. The appendix was for the nitty-gritty details that needed attention, but wouldn't bog down the main narrative.
Makes sense. You also had a fascinating conversation with Ian about cloud automation.
Oh, Ian was always ahead of the curve. We were talking about things like Zencoder and Amazon, these cloud-based solutions that were just starting to emerge.
You were even looking at cloud-only versions and commercial plans, so you were thinking ahead even back then.
Well, technology moves fast. You got to keep your eye on the horizon, right? Even if we weren't using those cloud technologies at that time, it was important to understand how they might impact our work in the future.
But then came the subtitle issue. 2-byte, multiple language subtitle muxing.
Oh, yeah, that was a tough one. Turns out the standard we were working with didn't really support it.
And you were running into problems with missing profiles and equipment that was being returned.
We were running out of time. And without those profiles, we couldn't properly test the subtitles. And subtitles are crucial, especially when you're dealing with a global audience.
So that was a major concern.
It was, yeah. We had to make it clear in the report that there were limitations to our testing in that area.
But despite these hurdles, you were moving towards the final report.
We were. We set a deadline of March 27th and planned to get feedback from everyone involved, both in the US and the UK.
So the reporting phase was in full swing.
It was. And it was crunch time.
Okay, so late March, around the 24th, your notes get very technical.
Yeah, we were diving into the weeds at that point.
What were some of the more complex issues you're grappling with?
Well, we're looking at things like $T files for custom fields and how they interacted with the different translation tools. I suggested we might be better off using .txt format, which is more human-readable and easier to work with.
That shows a real understanding of how different systems need to work together.
Yeah, it's not just about the tech itself, but how it fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah.
You got to think about the people using it, the workflows involved.
And then there was that double-byte Chinese subtitle issue again.
Ugh, that one kept coming back to haunt us.
You were looking at DVB embedding as a potential solution, using a soft tailbox downstream.
It was a workaround, but it seemed like the best option given the limitations of the teletext standard. It really highlighted the importance of understanding the nuances of these different broadcasting systems.
And your notes mention Kenneth's expertise on the matrix port usage.
Kenneth was a lifesaver on that front. He was adamant about avoiding SD since the project was focused on HD. He even suggested using HDO bypass cards to free up capacity. He was all about optimizing the system for peak performance.
That's what you want in a team member.
Absolutely.
Brian was also deep in the trenches looking at the existing workflows.
Right. He was focused on how we could integrate this new system without disrupting everything else. He was looking at the conversion of LST files to the Harris ADC, how Q tones and audio legs were handled through the Helium server, all that intricate stuff.
It's amazing how much goes on behind the scenes, isn't it?
It really is, and it all has to work together seamlessly.
And finally, as your time in Hong Kong was coming to an end, you had that final push to get everything documented.
The last few days were a blur. We were finalizing drawings, getting the V10 report ready to send to Stephen for both the UK and US teams. I wanted to make sure everything was wrapped up tight before I left.
And it's clear from your notes that communication was key throughout this whole project.
Oh, absolutely. You're constantly interacting with people, keeping them in the loop, managing expectations. It's as important as the technical work itself, maybe even more so.
And the way you were versioning the report, going from V.3 to V10, shows how much feedback and revision was happening.
It was a collaborative effort, for sure. Everyone had input, and we kept refining the report until it reflected the project accurately.
You also used Google Docs, setting up shared folders for collaboration.
Oh, yeah. Gotta love Google Docs. It made it so much easier for everyone to work together, no matter where they were. We could all see the latest version, make comments, track changes. It was a game changer.
And even though your assignment was ending, you were already planning for future feedback to Miranda after everyone had a chance to review everything.
Right. We wanted to make sure the vendor got all the feedback from both the UK and US teams. It's important to close that loop so they can understand what worked, what didn't, and how they can improve things going forward.
So looking back at the Hong Kong project, what are the big takeaways for you?
It's amazing how much you learn on your first gig, especially as a contractor. You realize it's not just about the technical skills, but about managing people, navigating different cultures, being adaptable, thinking on your feet. It's a whole package.
And you did all of that while juggling a team, testing plans, stakeholders, and that all-important report.
It was a baptism by fire, for sure, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. It taught me so much, and it set me up for everything that came after.
And looking back now, years later, what are some of the enduring lessons you've carried with you from that experience in Hong Kong? How do those lessons apply to your work today, even with all the technological advancements we've seen since then? What patterns and challenges keep popping up no matter where you go or what project you're working on? Think about it. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening to Reinventing Broadcast. Subscribe for more on AI content and the future of media. And visit ancast.tv for more info on Ben himself, the resources, other content, and news.